Welcome back to another episode of Learning to Paint on YouTube, where I'm teaching myself to paint using only YouTube videos and tutorials. Today on this episode, I'm going to attempt a painting of a bonfire. Now it sounds really simple, but the trick with this painting is going to be all the layers and the colors and the blending that it takes to mix the colors appropriately so the fire looks actually realistic. And that's my goal. I've been working over the last several episodes to develop my skills in color blending or color mixing, as well as creating images and using layers and different colors to produce images that are more realistic. So that's the goal for this episode. Let's jump right into the painting. So I started off laying in this grayish blue deep night sky, getting a slightly lighter as I moved toward the horizon, blending back up, and then it was time to block in the sky around the fire. You can see that I've sketched the basic outline of and composition of the painting, and so I'm kind of following that and then blocking in this color. Because it is the night sky, you see the lighter color just a little bit as it comes toward the horizon on either side. I actually made a mistake and brought the horizon too far down, and I realized in the original painting that I was copying that the horizon comes about halfway down, and then there's the ocean, and it moves to the near ground where it hits the beach. And so I repainted that with the lighter blue to show the reflection of the light on the water versus the clouds or the sky. It's a little bit different. You can see where I'm laying in now the beach, and it curves a little bit down canvas, coming closer to the viewer. And I kind of sketched around, I guess, the logs of the fire, so you can really begin to see that. This brown-blue mixture of the sand is almost black as it comes down closest to the viewer. And here I'm taking some light blue just to lay in some movement in the waves along the shoreline. The intent was to blend that into the sand so that it was very translucent. I wasn't quite successful in doing that, or as successful as the original artist, but it was a great experiment and attempt, and it didn't turn out bad the way that I decided to do it, or the way that mine ended up. You see the brighter blue, and it just looks like there's maybe some moonlight or something shining off of the water. I actually thought about putting a moon in the sky, but then realized probably wasn't at that level yet to be able to have multiple sources of light in a painting and make it look realistic, and one thing can throw the whole painting off. So just decided to follow the original. You'll notice also that I laid in there on the left-hand side some small islands or land masses and a little shadow out in the water. That was in the original painting as well. And now I'm coming in with a very, very dark brown blue mixture to kind of block in and create the structure of the bonfire where the logs are, laying in the logs as they're stacked kind of on each other. I'm just using my basic sketch as kind of a guide, and then creating from there kind of how the logs would lay in the fire. So it gave me kind of a chance to be a little creative with the logs And you can almost, or barely see, I guess, the difference between the logs, the darkness of the logs, and the shore, which is just a shade lighter. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that this painting, the challenge of this painting is the layering. And you'll see probably a dozen layers go on. This is the very first, which is the darkest, most red hue of orange to lay in and cover the deepest layers of the fire. But we can begin to lay in kind of the wispy feel or look of the flame, particularly around the logs. And so although it took longer, you'll notice I've sped it up. I think it's 4 times the speed, but it allowed me to show you with a smaller brush, you can create those kind of wispy lines. One thing that's interesting, if you notice, when you do the lines of light, which is this, in this case, the red, down around the logs, you don't have to have the contrast of the logs with the ground as much, because you can create the definition of the logs by the fire that kind of rolls around the logs. With the canvas now completely covered with color and the composition basically how I want it, now it's time to come back with that same dark red, orange, and put another layer on. Notice how much more the canvas is covered. It almost looks like a red rust brown, just with a second layer of that same color. This lays the foundation of the fire, and this, although it will mostly be covered up by the end, this layer of the dark, dark flames is the coldest part of the flame, and therefore reflects the least light or emits the least light, however you look at that. But the dark flame lays the foundation on which to build the rest of the layers of color of the flame. And this is kind of a fun technique, taking just a slightly brighter color to some of the edges and using the finger to smear or smudge the flame. You get this feeling of the movement of the flame. And here's one more layer with just, again, a slightly brighter, lighter color, slightly less saturated. And layer by layer, you begin to slowly build the, I guess it's almost the 3D appearance of the flame. After those 2 layers of kind of the brighter or the lighter edges of the flame, I brought in a little more orange So adding a little yellow to the mixture I had, the reddish mixture, brought more of an orange color. This allowed me to draw some of the, again, I use the word movement, but the individual movements of the flame. You can see individual, I guess they call it tongues of the flame with the orange. And notice at the beginning we laid down that really rather dark red or kind of brownish red. And as you bring in the orange, it really starts to look like there's a deeper tones that are closer and further away. Starts to build the body of the flame and take it from a 2D drawing to more of a 3D feel. The technique is almost the exact same thing, bringing a little titanium white and a little more yellow into this, brightening that orange up. Starting at the base where the embers would be the hottest, building quite a solid block of flame there, enveloping those logs that are most, I guess, submerged in the, or engulfed by the flames is probably better since it's not liquid. They're engulfed. They're wrapping the flame around just the suggestion of those, the tips of those logs, and bringing through the lighter color. Now I think this is the second with just a little, again, a little more titanium white in this to bring a more of a yellow orange. Putting a little bit of that out on the edges and at the top of the flame. But of course, as it moves into the atmosphere, it cools. And so it's the most bright down right in the center of the flame. Now with this layer, we're really starting to make some decisions about the brightest, most hot part of the flame. Again, this is almost a pure yellow now with the barest hint of red, but this wraps around all the logs. So using kind of a detail brush, a small brush, to draw the heat of the flames, and it begins to really start to look real as you draw in those cracks in the logs that the flames have eaten through. Now looking back, I think I made a mistake. I wish I had stepped back from the image and really not created such a column of the same color all the way up. because I started to do away with or to erase the feeling of three-dimensional flame that I had by taking the column of that yellow all the way up. I was able to kind of salvage it. Now you see I'm coming in with the almost white yellow. This is almost pure white, the hottest part of the fire, right around the logs where the coals are. And it was surprising to me how effective this bright, bright color was in bringing back that three-dimensional look of this painting. And the final stage is to come in with almost a pure white, not quite a titanium white, but almost, to articulate the most hot parts of the fire, the hottest points. So I'm using it very, very sparingly. Hey y'all, so that brings us to the end of this episode. Pretty lifelike. I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. It is a little chunky in the middle, but what I was really going for was the realism and the blending of the colors, which I think I learned so much more, as I do every time, and I'm getting better and better at this. So I'm pleased with how it turned out. I didn't do all of the techniques that the original artist did, just because I didn't have a certain type of brush. I didn't have the cheap brush he mentioned to create a lot of the sparks that will be in the original. So if you're interested in trying this out, definitely go over and visit the original tutorial, which is linked in the description of this video. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode, and we will see you next time on Learning to Paint on YouTube.